Welcome to the ArtsEd podcast, where we talk about all things related to drama school training and the performing arts industry as a whole. We will be chatting to industry professionals, ArtsEd alumni and ArtsEd teachers to gather insights around this ever-changing industry and training practices. Today we're joined by Oscar Toeman. Oscar is a theatre director who trained as a staff and associate director at the National Theatre, as an assistant director at the RSC, Shakespeare's Globe and West End, and the Young Vic Springboard programme. In 2020, he directed The Sugar Syndrome at Orange Tree, which was nominated for 4 Off-West End awards, and has directed a number of theatre and drama school productions, including ArtsEd back in 2018. Oscar is now working with ArtsEd's MA Acting students on their Shakespeare project, so we thought we'd have a quick chat with him about all things Shakespeare, as well as his advice for drama school graduates. Due to lockdown conditions, this interview takes place via Zoom, so apologies in advance for any sound issues. Okay, hi Oscar. Thank you so much for joining us on the ArtsEd podcast. So currently at the moment you're directing our MA Acting students in their Shakespeare project, and due to lockdown conditions this is all happening online. So as a director, how do you work around this? What's your technique?
Lovely to be here, Tess. Thank you very, very much for having me. Yes, I'm directing As You Like It at the moment with the MA actors, and it is indeed all over Zoom at present. It's really interesting because on the one hand, everything has changed. We're not in the same room, we're not in the same space. There are Zoom lags, there are a myriad of technical issues that we have to navigate. But on the other hand, not much regarding process has really changed. I think we've begun by working on the text in the same way that we'd work on it in person. And I suppose the challenge of Zoom is to find a way of telling the story and the stories that would come physically in a space that we all share, but which on Zoom require us to be more inventive and be more playful and be more, bolder and take more risks, really. Something I'm really interested in, which I think has informed my process throughout my career, but particularly on Zoom, is the difference between a play and a show. And I think often in the UK, we conflate the two. But sometimes I think a show sort of means something a bit deader and a bit repetitive, and it's something that everyone has signed off on and is agreed to, and everyone knows what they're doing. Whereas a play feels more alive and more vital and more fun, really, and irreverent. And I guess I'm informed by the fact that, or this idea has been informed by the fact that when I worked at Shakespeare's Globe many years ago as a young assistant director, the director of that show and I spoke a lot about what happened if a pigeon landed on the stage. And obviously, if a pigeon lands on the stage at the Globe, everyone in the yard is going to turn and look at the pigeon because it's real, it's alive, it's not pretending to be anything, it's not carrying out a series of preordained moves. It's just, it is. And what would be more exciting, and rather than watching actors pretending that a pigeon wasn't there, surely the most exciting thing would be watching an actor responding in that moment and playing with the pigeon. And that has always struck me as an artist about one of the very key essential truths of theatre, which is that it has to be as alive and as present tense as possible. So even though we're now no longer in the same shared light or the same shared space, I'm trying to find ways that allow us to keep as alive and as playful in this 360 degrees way as possible, so that if something goes wrong with the Zoom or if there's a technical mishap, that can be built into the performance, and the actors in the studio, the students can play with those limitations rather than feeling like it's prohibiting them. I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it certainly does. I mean, like talking about playfulness and spontaneity, I'm sort of gathering that that's usually how you tackle Shakespeare's work. How do you ensure that the students sort of connect with the piece, especially online as well? And also, how do you then reach out to an audience virtually?
So the first part is about how to connect with the students connecting with the text. And I think it's changing. I think my generation of artists are changing it slowly but surely. We have a tradition in the UK of treating Shakespeare like it's revered and it's a hallowed text, and we have to be very polite around it, and there's a particular way of doing it. And this kind of fallacy has, I think, sort of been soaked up into the bloodstream of the UK in part because I think Shakespeare's taught in English classes at schools. And I think it's a really problematic thing that's happened. I'm sure it started with the best of intentions. Maybe it didn't, I don't know. But it means that you feel sometimes, and I definitely felt this at school, like feeling excluded from Shakespeare, or that you don't quite get why they're talking about this in this particular way. And I'm interested, going back to being playful and irreverent and spontaneous, I think I'm interested in pulling the play. Well, it's a really interesting thing. You want to sort of do two things concurrently. You need to go and meet Shakespeare, but also you need to pull Shakespeare to you. And I think sometimes thinking back to the kind of the Shakespeare voice version of acting, it feels very polite. It feels very dignified. It also feels very from the neck up acting. And I think it's really important to pull these plays apart and to really get inside them and to really investigate rigorously like what's going on with the language. So often something I do is I get the actors to paraphrase the text, but rather than paraphrasing it like you're translating it from, I don't know, English to French, it's about understanding what the emotional currents are going on underneath it. So a character might say, I'm trying to think of a good line now, really. So hopefully one will come to me. But I think often we do this thing in Shakespeare where we treat it as politely as we think it's meant to be treated, and then you've got to remember that Shakespeare's writing for the groundlings as well as for the academics up in the gods. And I think by understanding it and investigating it in a kind of emotionally truthful way, suddenly you realise that this is a play about a series of siblings who all seem to fall out with each other and go on this ridiculous adventure in a forest. And I don't know about you, Tess, but I have two siblings, both younger, and I remember when we were young, much younger, just being horrific in turn to each of them, and vice versa. And and I think it's about understanding that emotional truthfulness that allows you to get inside it and be playful with it, rather than feeling like you're doing something that is almost almost ritualistic. Like I was in Japan many years ago, and I remember being told about I think it's No theatre, but I might have got it wrong. I think it's No, where the parts get passed down from within acting families, like this dynastic performance, and nothing changes, and it's sort of set in stone. And what happened in I don't know what years production started in, so please forgive my ignorance, people who know more. But like that, the production in 1973 is exactly the same as the production in 2003. And it's you learn the same amount of steps and everything is incredibly measured. And I think that feels like how British theatre sometimes treat Shakespeare. And I think that's to be avoided at all costs. So going back to your original question after that long waffle, but hopefully interesting waffle, like I'm really interested in what is built into the text that we can use that helps us. So, and that might be things that seem ostensibly scary on the surface, like what's it mean for a new thought to begin in the middle of a line of Shakespearean verse? Well, you could be freaked out and think, okay, well, I've just got to split the thoughts up. But actually, wouldn't it be really exciting if you allow that new thought that begins in the middle of the line to almost strike you as a brand new thought as you're saying it? And by doing that, you'll convince the audience that you just had this thought in the moment, and suddenly it becomes very alive and active. So I'm really excited by understanding what Shakespeare, the clues in the Shakespeare that can be used to inform our performances today, whilst at the same time encouraging like maximum spontaneity and playfulness around the text. So again, we have massive big speeches in Shakespeare. They take up half the page sometimes, and I think if you're not sure what to do with it, or if you're a bit new, you might think, okay, well, I go quiet for a bit and this other person has this long bit of speech. But actually, and you're being incredibly polite, Tess, and sort of proving the opposite to the rule. But like, if we were meeting in real life, you'd be talking yeah, and we'd be talking over each other the whole time, wouldn't we? Yeah. Because that's how an exchange of ideas work. And I think it's worthwhile, even on Zoom, which is really interesting because of the technical challenges of that. Like when you're listening and you hear something you like, we say yeah or we say no. We encourage the speaker on, and I think it's about treating these texts not as like hallowed bits of poetry, but you're actually doing something to the other person with what you're saying. And I hope that will come across in the performance. So there's that part of it. And then, so hopefully that speaks about how to get students to connect with the text. And then in terms of pulling it out to the audience, I mean, I don't know yet. I'm kind of excited to see how it works. Like we're being really fun and really playful and not allowing ourselves to be limited by the fact that Zoom is a sort of from the neck up means of performing. I mean, we've got actors playing trees, we've got actors playing sheep. It's trying to be as dynamic and as vibrant as you can be whilst being aware of the fact that there might be a lag. But having that spontaneity and having people thinking quickly, like I think secretly the key note about heightened text, which I think a lot of theatre acting is just think on the line. And if you think on the line, you'll get ahead of the audience, and that forces them to have to keep up, to work harder to keep up, and suddenly they're investigating and investing in this world as well. I think it's different to screen acting, which I've been told is about getting actors to slow their thoughts down so we see them across their face. On stage, which is what this production I guess is technically a hybrid, but it feels more theatre-y. It's about thinking quickly, and I think those non-verbal sound games I've mentioned earlier, like or the yeah-yeah-yeahs, like by getting actors to do those, you're also thinking quickly because you're actively listening in the moment and responding back. So hopefully that will come across.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I think just playing with the text and being spontaneous with it and allowing free thought will translate ultimately to the audience. So I think that is a really great way to work with it. I mean, you mentioned your previous experience at, the RSC, the Globe, and all of that stuff. So you've obviously had lots of experience in the industry, which is why usually our final question in the podcast is, what advice would you give to our graduating actors, not just the actors here at ArtsEd, but just generally all graduates leaving drama school this year?
I mean, I always think to some extent that no one should ever listen to anyone else's advice because it's really specific to that individual. But what I would say is it's a really hard time. Everyone knows it's a really hard time. So I think the powers that be will be very sympathetic if you're graduating in the pandemic era. My instincts are to listen to yourself and to others, to get to know yourself and to see and to listen, but to not shut yourself off from what other people have to offer. I think it's important to remember it's a really, really, really long game. And if you're not starring in a Netflix at the age of 24, that doesn't mean you've failed. I think we have a really odd relationship with success in the industry and in our lives. And that might be a societal thing that needs to be reconsidered in our relationship between being an artist. And I think the last thing I'd say is look sideways as much as you look up. I think we all are ambitious and want to make work and want to do really exciting projects. And we want to work with really exciting talents. And I think something that I wish I'd done more of is worked with my peers when I was just starting out. And I think it's really exciting if you do that, because I think then you have a squad and a cohort and a group of mates really who you've contributed to artistically, and they likewise. And as you grow up and rise up the ranks together, you have that kind of that shared sense of past and those projects and those memories and that kind of working processes that are workable. I think that's the thing that I'd really encourage, particularly in the current state of things where the larger organisations are less able to be supportive. I think what people can do really productively and usefully, and it genuinely is usefully, is to start making work with their peers starting from now, really.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice, especially at the moment when everything is so uncertain. It is just being supportive of the people around you. So that's brilliant advice. Thank you. Oscar, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate your time, and best of luck with the Shakespeare project with our MA actors. And thanks again.
Not at all. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the ArtsEd podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at ArtsEd London.